I'm honored to open this session. And before we start, I'd like to say a few words. Where are my colleagues from the school? Yura and Sveta, Nastya, and Marina. Where are you? And Natasha is here. Okay. Inka called in sick. Prokhorova is called in sick too. So it's okay. So then don't be disappointed. We should not be disappointed. You should be disappointed only about yourself. So how you behave in life. Just the rest is irrelevant. It will come. So I'm disappointed myself because Irina Prokhorova is certainly is a gem of our seminar. So like all our experts are. But she called me and she said that she can't make it. Because she can't speak. And now she has a sore throat. And I'd like to introduce Toby Gati to you, and who was in the States. You remember when you went to Toby Gati? You remember? I'm not going to introduce her, so you know her. So a special thanks to Nadari from Georgia. Special thanks. I'd like really to thank him that he made it here, so that he came. It was quite difficult for him to come. And I'd like to thank the Polish delegation that is here as well. So I'd like to thank Mayo, specifically. She didn't only came from Poland, from England, but she came from my beloved, wonderful family. Am I right? Yeah, in saying that. So I'd like to thank you all once again, and the Ukrainian delegation. So is it? Have you here? Yes, here. Just so they took so long just to get over the border that unfortunately just arrived, and so it was an easy, tough going. But they made it here. But the Americans came. This is the most important thing. So represented by Toby. Yeah. Americans are here. Good. Okay. These Americans they don't allow us to live. Those bad Americans. When they moved into Iraq, when they moved into Kosovo, I want to criticize them a little bit. So when they violated the law and order, and then what they did to the poor Indians, and you remember that, So it's all their fault. Yes, it's certainly not the best examples, but what they really have it good is how the system for life is organized, where there is an independent judiciary, where things are discussed and bended over, and so you're open, even if you're an immigrant. The most recent book of Charles Gati, husband of Toby, dedicated to Zbigniew Brzezinski, and so there's one of the chapters he talks about that Brzezinski is a person who was born in Poland. And I don't like him very much. So there's no love lost. But he made his way in life, and they became only in America it's possible. This American dream, and so because there are lots of different prejudices, and they had slavery and segregation. They had black and white. So they had it all. But then they somehow tuned it, aligned it, and now these people are so famous, and so they're not immigrants anymore. So Brzezinski himself was saying that America is the only country where Brzezinski, so the last name being Brzezinski, could become the aide to the President of the United States with such name as possible. Just only and Tomy Gati could become the counselor of President Clinton. So not having to change the name, just like Brzezinski, so could become the aide to the President without changing your last name. But everyone criticizes America. That's a good habit, Everyone is supposed to criticize America. So in this way, but now just on the personal side, Yuri, the school, and so then a wonderful team that works very closely with the school every year, year in, year out. And we should say that in the last 10, 12, 14 years, so owing to Toby, a lot has changed, how to put it, in this stability of our school. And so the political, financial changes have occurred owing to her. So certainly I'm talking about some horrible things because they called us the foreign agent, and we have a CV saying that we're not involved in political activities. That is why. So we're not yet foreign agents, the way I see it. And Toby and her husband Charles, who so they are the authors of the book that our school translated. That's the book about Hungarian events. And I don't remember Dmitry. Yeah, it's translating. So it's not. Yes, and actually Mark Dadyan so translated this wonderful book, and on March, the May, and so there's a wonderful event so between husband and wife 40 years after the official registration of their marriage, and we were invited so for this wonderful event, but we're not going. We're not going because it's a long way, but it's a period that we are not going to that wonderful event. But I, together with you, I want just to make a wonderful present, unique present from all of you and from myself and from Yuri. Maybe it's not such an outstanding present, not such an outstanding gift, but it's made by the best creative endeavor made by Russian hands, and in honor of you. In honor of you. And I'm going just to give it to you right now. It was painted. So the platter was made the fiancée of the artist. So who designed this logo 20 years ago? So that the person who made the platter. This is the logo of the school, and it's all handmade. Yes, I'm touched. Thank you. 40 years. Can you imagine having to live for 40 years with one guy? That's a lot. Okay, thank you very much, all of you. I'm very grateful, Lena, Yuri, Moscow School, for this chance to acquaint myself many years ago. So to meet you all, and so that we meet in the States quite often, and here we meet with you, and to organize this seminar in the United States. And so I think that almost half of you have been to the States with us. No, it's not that often that the person has a chance to impact, to influence people. It's not very often, and I'm very happy that I had this chance to influence people, and so that you could visit my country, to see America as it is. Not just what you read from papers or from magazines, but the way people live every day. So how the government works and how it doesn't work sometimes. I'm very touched. Thank you, very bottom of your heart. I really appreciate it. It couldn't have been better than this. Thank you. It's wonderful. Now, I'd like to talk not about the topics that I've been involved in all my life. That's international policy, international politics. Russia and the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union, America, and Russia and the US, and so how our relations evolved, how to improve our bilateral relations. So, but I'm not going to talk about that. That was my life work. How to put it better? So it's so the evolution of civil society, but it's at the end of the day, it's the evolution of my life, my public life. It's the evolution. It's not developed because a person cannot be only involved in international relations all the time, 24/7. So sometimes I wouldn't say it's boring, but I would say it's sad if we do it 24/7. And I don't know, when a person grows up and he is a grown up, when he is an adult, and we need to think about the future, when you have to think not only about the future of the world, but when you have to think about the future of your children. So in what kind of world they will be living, in what kind of world, so what your personal values are. So what are the most important values? What do you want for your kids? Just to buy a car or a house? No, that's not all. And so to make them happy, what does it mean? What does happiness mean? What it means? So we have two kids with Charles, and he has 3, so we have 5 kids in the family. That's a lot by the standards of the US. Yes, in Russia it's a lot too. And 10 grandchildren. And so that's why I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about personal evolution. I would describe it as that. It's more than the academical understanding of what evolution of the civic society is. And then I will move over to English, in my native tongue.
As I just said, I have devoted a lot of my life to foreign policy, but I've also done a lot of things on domestic policy. Some of you have seen that when you've come to America, and some of the speakers that have been chosen are not on foreign policy. They deal with domestic issues. And I've come not to convince you of any point of view, but to explain 3 things. The first is what I do in my country to participate in NGOs, educational institutions, lobbying groups, political parties. That's the first thing. The second is why I do it. And I just mentioned that I do have a desire to improve the life of ordinary citizens in our country so that my children live in a better world. And the third point I want to raise is what kind of environment, what kind of political, economic, social environment do you need so that people can actually make a difference when they participate in civic life? What kind of institutions, laws, practices make it possible for civil society to survive? So, as I said, it's quite personal, but I hope it sheds some light on civic society in my country and the way citizen participation has evolved. And I would welcome questions from everyone, but particularly from people who are in my country and have some questions about what they saw and whether what I say makes sense to you after having been there. So I think it may surprise some of you that I belong to organizations that deal with domestic political issues. For example, I'm active in an organization that strives to reduce drunk driving among teenagers. Why do I do that? Because I had 2 teenagers who were driving cars, and 50,000 people a year die in traffic accidents, and I very much wanted my children to be safe. So I participate in this organization that tries to reduce the availability of alcohol for children, and that also makes it possible to call for a taxi, for example, for free if you've had something to drink and you think you shouldn't drive. And to change social attitudes. So if your child calls you at 2 in the morning and says, "Mom, I had too much to drink," You don't punish them, but you say thank you for calling me because you probably saved your child from an accident. So you have to change the way people think. And you don't punish, but you reward good behavior. I also give time and money to improving the educational opportunities for poor people in Washington, D.C. Why do I do that? Because my daughter is a social worker, and she comes home all the time with stories about people who have very difficult lives, who try the hardest they can and still can't succeed. So I think I and my family owe it to those people to give them the means to try to succeed. The government should help, but so should ordinary people. Some organizations are more general than I belong to. I belong to several organizations that fight prejudice and extremist hate groups, and others that protect freedom of press and privacy. Some of these organizations are active only in the U.S., and some of them work in other countries as well. Obviously, you can't do everything, and there's only 24 hours in the day. So I also contribute financially to many more organizations. They write and they describe their activities, and sometimes I just send them money. I don't do anything for them. I just give them money because I care about what they do. And every year, at the end of the year, when my children were young, I used to give them a certain amount of money and say, you must give it away. You pick the organization and who you want to help, but you have to give it to somebody to make their lives better. And they now do that every year. Most of these organizations rely on private money. They don't get government money. Some do, but many don't. Another organization I'm active in is one you all know, and that's the one that brings you to America, Supporters of Civil Society in the United States. Over 600 of you have already come, so there are many more than in this room. And the people on the board of this group, it's an NGO, are all interested in Russia. Some, like Ambassador Pickering, were ambassadors here. Some have businesses, work for businesses that have factories in Russia. Some are professors who run institutes, but all of them contribute their time for free, and some of them also contribute financially to this group so that we can make these trips possible. I joined the board of the school along with Charlie Ryan and participate actively in the board. And if you know the difference in time, you'll understand that a 10 a.m. board meeting means that I have to get up at 3 a.m. in order to participate. So I try to do it as often as I can, but not always. I became active in one foreign policy organization. It's called J Street. It's a new organization, and it supports Middle East peace based on the idea that there have to be two states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state in the Middle East, or we will never have genuine peace. It's the only organization I belong to that lobbies, that registers to lobby. All others don't lobby, they just provide information. They do try to change laws, but they're not required to register. I feel strongly that I have to do this, and I know I'm not going to save the world, but it makes me feel good, and I hope some people benefit from it, so that's important. Let me give you some background on civil society in America. I didn't know much about it and frankly didn't care because I just cared what I did. But it turns out there are over 2 million nonprofit organizations in the U.S. 2 million. Let me tell you about 3. One is in the District of Columbia, which you've been to if you've been to the United States, and you know how small it is. There are 500,000 people in the district, but there are 22,000 non-governmental organizations in that district registered. The states that you've been to, Missouri, a medium-sized state, has 53,000 NGOs, and Illinois has 96,000. California, of course, has the most, and New York, the second most. The majority aren't political, They deal with social and economic problems. They provide services to people. They work through churches, synagogues, mosques. They develop skills, and they get finances from a wide variety of people. No political party registration is required. They all believe in a quote that comes from our founding documents, which is their goal is to further the national interest. And they all are dedicated to protecting the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. They are activists. Some of them want a different system of taxation, for example, of education, and they try to influence public opinion and eventually lawmakers to support their ideas, but they do not have to register to do this. And I can't stress this enough because I repeatedly hear that the laws in Russia are like the laws in the United States. That is true to only a very limited extent. It is not true that these organizations have to register as foreign agents if they get foreign money to support their ideas. Some of them are liberal, some of them are conservative, but it's not part of our culture to accuse groups which you disagree with of being threats to the system or being enemies of the American system of government. Although this does happen sometimes, and the more extreme the group is, the more likely it is to call people who disagree with it enemies. Active participation, whether you agree with the existing policies or not, is seen as strengthening the legitimacy of the system, that you feel you have a role and can make a difference. A very wise man who used to lecture to your groups, and he unfortunately died this year, used to remind his friends that protecting the right to disagree is the core of the U.S. Constitution, and it is also, of course, the basis of civil society. The sentence he used to say, and I'm going to quote him, was, "The Constitution was not written to protect the rights of those with whom you agree. It was written to protect the rights of those with whom you disagree." You don't need a constitution to protect the rights of people you agree with. And events of 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to just use one example, show me, and I hope will show you, how difficult it is to put this into practice. And I'm going to talk about my membership in two specific civil society organizations that really work in different, they oppose each other in a way, and I'll explain why I support both of them. What happened 2 weeks ago in the United States was a member of a far-right extremist group took a rifle. He went to a Jewish center in Kansas, and he opened fire, and he said his goal was to kill as many Jews as he could. This person had been writing anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-immigrant statements for many years, and in fact had been in jail for some of them. The people he killed 3 people, turned out were passersby, and not one of them was Jewish. Well, one of the groups I support is called the Southern Poverty Law Center. The name doesn't really tell you what it does. It's a group dedicated to fighting hate crimes, far-right military organizations, and underground militias, of which there are many in the United States. It has used the courts to confiscate the property of these groups. It has tried to get them off the internet, and it has sometimes put their leaders in jail. In fact, the information about the man who did this, who is now in jail, came from this group and not from the government. And why didn't it come from the government? Because the government does not do a good job of keeping track of what Americans do. I know this sounds strange given the news you hear about what a good job it does, but it doesn't do a good job. And it doesn't track what I call domestic terrorist organizations. One government organization tried to do this, and there was a big cry from many groups that said, you have no right to do this in an open way. I guess other organizations have a right to do it in a secret way. But the conclusion that this organization came to several years ago was that veterans who have served in Afghanistan and in Iraq are much more likely to become extremists or white supremacists than are other groups. And the reason is that when they're overseas They know what they're fighting for, and when they come back, they don't fit. They can't fit into society again. And that's a view that's very unpopular in America, especially with veterans groups who don't want to acknowledge what happens sometimes. And it's very unpopular with politicians, because these are the politicians who've sent these people to the wars. And so they don't want to acknowledge that what they've done is turn perfectly normal people, some of them, small percent, very small percent, into extremists. So what happened is private groups had to trace what was happening because the government wouldn't do it. And the point of the research was not to blame the veterans. It's not their fault what happened to them. It was to say there's a large number of people who are not being helped when they return to America. And this is what has to be done to help these people. So instead of saying, let's not talk about it, or this is anti-American, or you're not being patriotic because you're not defending veterans, the idea was get them some help. Here are many thousands of people who have problems. Don't say it doesn't exist. Don't make a law saying it's a crime to criticize veterans or wars. Help these people. So that was the goal. But there's another group I support. That's called the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And their job is to defend the right of free speech, including the rights of far-right people to say what they think, even if it's anti-Semitic, and I am Jewish, even if it's anti-Muslim, they have the right to say it. They don't have the right to act on it. And this organization has pressed for more openness on the part of the government about the information it collects and the people it watches, because it says you have to prove someone is a threat before you watch them. You can't just watch everyone. So here's the question. Do I want the government to keep tabs on anyone who could be a possible threat? Or do I want to allow the maximum expression of freedom of ideas, even if those ideas are ones I don't support? Well, I guess the answer for me is I want both, which is a strange answer, but it's true. I do want both. I want organizations that will defend what they believe in, whether it's to control extremist groups or to give people the right to speak. And I want balanced laws that do two things. The first is it preserves my freedom. And the second is it preserves my safety. So I do want both. Even as I realize that sometimes these are impossible to reconcile. But that's the nature of society, of laws. You are reconciling different interests. Now, I realize that before 9/11 happened and the World Trade Center was destroyed, you would have a different view than you might have on the day after World Trade Center was destroyed. Right after, you might say, I'll do anything to protect my safety. I don't care. I don't care. If I'm not alive, I don't have freedom. But before that, or maybe now, 13 years later, I have a different view, which is you have to balance the two. So I want you to notice two things. The first is that I'm not going to rely on any politician ever to find that balance. The reason is politicians are tied up with the government in power. They just are. It's just a fact. They can't imagine anyone could do a better job than they could, and they don't want anyone else to have their job. So, and secondly, they are very easily influenced by the executive branch, especially if the president is of the same party that they are in. Generally, our system believes that concerned citizens can come up with good ideas to make the system work better, and that we don't have to leave this to politicians. Notice also that I'm not willing to let my government decide what the best balance is between freedom and safety, because the executive branch will always choose safety, always, over freedom. Governments prefer to work without being asked too many questions, and there's a great temptation to make things illegal because that's the safest path. And they will do it usually in the name of national security. And to prevent this from happening is the goal of civil society and the organizations I mentioned. On the other hand, civil society will never take the place of government, and it will always be outside government, and they will be better at criticizing, analyzing, discussing than at government. We've seen this, especially in the Middle East, where governments are weak, and when civil society went out on the street, the institutions of government became even weaker. And so civil society seemed as if it was the cause of the breakdown of state authority. But you have to remember that in the Middle East, it was the failure to let civil society develop and the failure to let people participate that led people out on the streets. That is to say, the problem was too little citizen participation in the past, not too much. What the best balance is between freedom and safety, between government and civil society, is really for the citizens of each country to decide. To me, what matters most is that civil society develops independent expertise that can influence how government makes decisions. And to do that, civil society needs good contacts up to government and down to citizens. If civil society makes the state function more effectively, if it delivers services more efficiently without corruption, and if it tells the people what the state is doing in its name, then it is doing its job. And those of you who were in the US last month will recall that one of the speakers from the Cold War Project spoke about this and the need to get information out. So civil society can provide a place where people learn to govern themselves, they learn to work with people on a voluntary basis, they learn to appeal to people to get their support, and they learn by making mistakes. And they also teach that to be an opponent is not to be an enemy. And it's very interesting because there was an article that was written by a Canadian politician in an American paper trying to explain to the American public the difference between an enemy and an opponent in political life and why it's so important not to think of an opponent, of somebody who disagrees with you as an opponent, because as an enemy, because an enemy is someone you want to destroy, where an adversary is someone you want to defeat, but you can make a compromise with. And he goes on to talk about that situation and says that in America he worries that the political system is beginning to see people who disagree as enemies and not opponents, and he regards this as a very bad development. It's always going to be the nature of people in power not to want to share power. It's just how politics is organized. And there's no state in the world that will voluntarily change the way it does business, except in response to an active citizenry. And that's why civil society cannot exist in a vacuum. It has to be part of a system. It has to be a part, it grows from an educated public and the development of norms that value each citizen and what it can contribute. And in this sense, there's really no model of civil society that fits every situation and every system. I'm sure those of you who came to my country came back thinking there are many things that you saw that wouldn't work here, but that's how it should be. not everything that works in one country will work here, and not everything that works in Canada will work in the United States. Not everything that works in the United States will work in countries of Europe. But it is true you can't automatically transfer, but one thing is always true in every country. The ultimate judge of whether civil society is functioning will be the citizens of the country, not the state. It will be each group that decides whether what they do has value, and it will be their opinion that should matter. So in closing, I just want to address all of you from the Moscow School and say I've seen how you work, I've seen what you do, and I know that each of you takes seriously your desire to contribute to the development of a civil society, no matter how long that takes. And I just want you to know that that is your task. It's not my task, it's your task as citizens of your country. But I do want you to know that you are not alone.
Коллеги, пожалуйста, у нас есть возможность.
So we have a chance to ask questions and, become opponents. So could you please introduce? Alexey Mironov from Samara, graduate of 2005, Samara 2005. Could you please tell me, Toby, within the parameters, in the message that you gave away, for the American government, a Russian government is an enemy or an opponent, and the Russian society for American government is an enemy or an opponent? Considering our rhetoric and propaganda, we have difficulties, differentiating. So what's your feel on it? What's your take on it?
Я не могу считать, что русский народ и
I cannot consider Russian society and Russia an enemy. I just cannot. Yesterday, we were sitting and talking and decided, as when we had, during the Second World War, we turned out to be allies. So, that's what happened, actually, what was the case. So I believe currently we have huge differences. We almost hear nothing that you always hear, almost hear nothing that we say, and we hear next to nothing of what you say, and we feel emotions. Emotions are good for love and relations, but probably not so good, because people say that love and hatred go together, hand in hand. And very often it happens that love turns into hatred. You can love someone and then hate, just, overnight. And this period and the image of an enemy is a very dangerous thing, because probably they think they're on top. You can control, but these emotions are uncontrolled, poorly controlled. And speaking about extremists, here everyone has them. And if you have extremism and arms and emotions, it's a dangerous mix. A colleague from Yaroslavl, please go ahead. Sergei Fedorov, Yaroslavl. 2003 alumni. So I thank you very much for your very interesting story. I wanted to specify, you spoke about very convoluted relations between the civil society and executive authority. So to what extent the civil society should control the executive authority? And this control should be exercised at the goal-setting stage. For instance, a civil society would set the goal to ensure security and wealth affluence, or the control should be deeper. What would be the methods to make sure how the budgets would be allowed for such purposes? What is the American experience, or what it should be? Thank you. Firstly, we cannot say that civil society and executive authorities, branches, because those who used to serve, they used to work for government organizations, and they do not live separately in a different world. Probably they understand each other, but sometimes what can happen when a person becomes a bureaucrat, an official? They, I have everything. I have info, I have power, and I can decide, I can address any issue. And others say, we're sorry. No. You are going for several years, and then you come back, and the most important is that when executive branches change, you don't want others to give a chance. You don't want to give away control, I guess, when your adversary will come to power. Think about it. You now are no more government, and you want them to be. But when you are there, but it's not forever, it's not for good, so you have to think about it. How can you control? First, freedom of media, independent court judges, budget, control over budget, Congress. That did not allow the president to do whatever he wishes. Look, this Obama cares, or probably Obama wanted to close down Guantanamo, and the Congress did not give the money, did not allow what to do. He can say close. No, he cannot. And then there is tension between, but this is okay, and we need to understand it is because the quiet period in life is only between crises, and it should be so. And questions. You need to prevail, to insist that the people have the right to know what their representatives are doing. You don't need to pray to them, to beg, oh, please give me, to implore. They have to. It's their sacred duty. They owe you. They have to tell you. It's just the other way around. And this would be an ideal system. I understand that no one has it. We don't have it. Others don't have it. And I don't want you to think that I'm going to lecture you, to mentor you. But understand the psychological principles of the system. And then you need to fight, bargain. A person cannot win all the time, but cannot lose all the time. Otherwise, he will not feel part of the system. Thank you. Thank you very much. As Elena asked us to ask good-natured questions. So I'm trying to be to sound polite. So when Bush the Jr. was elected, Condoleezza Rice spoke about the relation between America and Russia. We're not going to be enemies. We're not going to rival. We are going to ignore. What do you think? If this policy is still valid during Obama, and forgive me for the comparison, do you believe that the United States today starts reminding the Central Committee of the Soviet Party? It means when the pro-Soviet force wins in some African country, so it means that it's good, people won. But if they lose, they say, oh, imperialist forces win, you know? So, for instance, take Ukraine. If people go against Ukraine and say, oh, civil society. But if people vote for federalization, they say they are Russian agents. So the question is, can thousands of people, dozens of thousands, be Russian paid agents? And again, my question, I'm afraid so probably this policy of ignoring is still operational, is still practiced. And this behavior of the United States, like a Soviet Union, high and mighty, and stops us from friendship, because I'm trying to formulate, ignoring Russia prevents developing the civil society and Russia and our mutual understanding. And this policy of the United States prevents us understanding the United States. I believe after this question you have to introduce yourself. Thank you. I'm lost. Yeah, I didn't expect. Yeah, my name is Alexei from Saratov, deputy of a municipal community. It's surprising. The third question was about Ukraine. I thought the first question will concern Ukraine. Thank you for your question. I cannot cover Ukraine within my time slot. It's impossible. And I will not, but I think it's impossible to ignore Russia. Russia cannot be ignored. But in the past, it was so that probably it was wrong. It was probably our perception in America, misconception. When we see issues with Russia, so more attention we pay to Russia. Or if you think that what was said by Yevgeny Yasin and Gantmacher, so what they were saying that economics here doesn't matter. This is not the biggest part of global economy. And then when there are some talks and negotiations, the Russian opinion wouldn't count. When there is internet and Google, Microsoft, when innovations, so if it is not our company, America, Europe, or speaking about China, it's not about you. When it concerns arms and weapons, peace and war, then Russia counts. So we have an impression that the only here it is so difficult to influence the economic and other issues. I don't know if I have expressed myself the way I wanted to. And speaking about Ukraine, we have totally different views on what happened there. It would be better if your perception would be shown on our TVs and our news would be shown broadcasted on your TVs, because it's difficult to be hysterical when there are views that do not. It's difficult to be hysterical when you have an opinion that's different from hysterics. It's better to read interviews with people who live in the regions where they say there is chaos. You learn why indeed is there chaos. You asked a question: can we count Russian agents? Well, 1,000 American agents as well. American spies, can we? If you can, then our people can. Yes, why not? But it's more difficult to send some from America than from Russia. More, well, close. And that's why so many questions what happened. And so murky, unclear, clouded over, and the Ukrainians have so much trouble in-house that what happened is their own business. They need to settle domestically. It would be much better if they organize themselves and elect the best president. Would be, so to say, desirable. But it is there, up to them. And saying that this is our sphere, area of influence, you say yours or ours, sounds very weird. Very weird. I will not be arguing with people who say that America had this policy. Iraq, Kosovo, and a number of others. I will not argue. I can only tell that I was against the war in Iraq, and I'm here. So it means I took part in Obama's campaign. But I was not sitting back home without internet access, because I'm a political person. So you see the difference. But to say that what we're making errors, and you have the right to make errors. This is a strange system to rule the world, isn't it? We can repeat, catch up, and overtake, pass. We can do more. This is your right. We cannot control what Russia does. But if we want to live in peace, ideal, but live together, work together. Working together is a must. We need to find out some consensus, the basis for activity and trust. And I'm scared. Well, looking at the last 20 years, we have tried to build very close relations between our government, and it took only months to send them down the drain. I had a feeling that we had something similar before the First World War, when they saw how they could live together, and suddenly it turned absolutely upside down. And then the war came, and I will do everything within my power to avoid it, at the level of communication, talking to you, and agreeing or disagreeing. This doesn't matter, because as I was saying, the opponent is not your enemy.
And this is very important to understand. Well, I have a wide choice. Thank you. Yes, yeah. Nikita Sliptsov from Ulyanovsk region. Well, you do not remember me. Nepotism. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Gati, for a very interesting presentation. You have spoken about 2 million NGOs in the United States. Could you explain why such a vast number of them exists? What is the reason? We don't have so many, naturally, but probably no other country has so many NGOs. What would be the reason for such an generous abundance? Well, frankly, I don't know. I can say that when there is a problem in America, then the first task would be to create a group, to form a group of people, a task force, if you will, who would set on trying to resolve the problem. One could complain, one can go to, but creating groups seems to be more American way of trying to do things. The second circumstance is that it is very easy to set up an NGO in the United States. One has to register, one has to have the charter, one has to vote, that's true, one has to have $100, but I work for a legal firm, but I still don't deal with my assistants deal with that, but it's still very, very simple and straightforward. What else? Anything else? And then the only control is the control over the money, control over the funds. The government wants to know about the transparency, wants to have an account of where is the money coming from, and but clearly that not all NGOs are angels, and people steal. People are not angels, and there are transgressions and faults and even crimes within the environment of the NGOs, as in any other environment. So the government has to have certain control mechanisms. I can tell you that a Center for Common Interest, recently established in Washington, D.C., was set up for Russian money, private money. And but I'm not saying that this was just 100% Russian. No, it's not a Russian organization. It's an American organization, but it had a Russian co-investor. But it's not a political organization. They did not have to register as a foreign agent because they do not deal with politics. Well, what do you mean? What do we mean by every person is dealing with politics? It's part of our life, and within the school, it's also political. Otherwise, we can give you our books, and you can. It's all about politics, and it's within the American culture. My grandmother was not born in America. She was not American, but it turned out that her granddaughter, myself, I worked at the White House, and I work I've been engaged in politics. So this is the idea. It's the idea which is in the heart of America, that any person can do anything without the interference. If a government creates an umbrella, then the umbrella of security, then that's all that the government must do. Well, we're coming close to this ideal. Some organizations are very easy to set up in this country. For instance, if you want to set up a branch of the Popular Front, you would have no problem. But gradually, I think times will change. Thank you. Ruslan Kamiev, alumnus of 2010. When I was in the United States in 2010 or 2011, I came as a deputy muftis of the Muslims of Russia, and at that time, when I had many questions about the attitude towards Muslims in America, I had a meeting with the Muslim community in Chicago. Well, I was already surprised in the Chicago airport when a lady in her Muslim cloak was checking my bag, and I could see namaz being done on the lawn in front of the White House. During my visit, when I had meetings with common Muslims and mullahs, I could see no Islamophobia. And I had I truly believe that there is no any repression against the Muslims, and I wanted to thank you for breaking and demolishing my stereotypes and stereotypes of many in the Northern Caucasus about Islamophobia in America. There is no Islamophobia in America, at least not that I saw any, and I would like to thank you personally for having organized this meeting and for creating a society where even a small group of people, irrespective of the national, ethnic or religious belonging, has a rights, and their rights are protected. Yes, colleague, I'm afraid not to have given you the right to speak. Sergei Chekushkin, Chuvashia, alumnus of 2004. Dear Toby, or even, I have one son, but I know for sure, but you'd agree that when our children come to this room, for instance, they would be friends. They would be together, they would find common ground, and there would be no reason for them to quarrel. Then our children will grow up and they will feel themselves to be citizens of their respective countries. And they might have some religious feelings and beliefs. But the reason or the background, the values start from the infancy, but for some reasons many people forget about these values. So when our politicians talk about geopolitical or national values, I think that this human basis is forgotten, which is very alarming. Something that why does this happen? Oh, that's a very good question. I'll tell you why I'm smiling. My youngest granddaughter, I have many Russian toys and sucks like the Easter eggs, and they play. There is this Siberian toy, the clay toy. And dolls, so she loves these toys. I wanted her to speak Russian a little bit, and so she was saying, "I love you" in Russian, "I love you," and she likes the sound of these words, how it sounds in Russian. But she also says "da da da," and so she knows she has a little bit of Russian. What can be said to your point? Our children believe themselves to be Americans, but not only. They do not have, the younger generation have less stereotypes. They're much freer, maybe not politically, but they have a much better idea and vision of another person, irrespective of his or her homosexuality or heterosexuality, the color of their skin, or other features. And this is very important, that the Americans do not differentiate between and I married a person of a different religion, and my daughter would say, "Well, what does it matter?" But geopolitical interest, I think that the Americans are mostly disinterested in foreign policy. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to have war in Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere. They do not understand when you're talking about the Ukraine. They're not interested. The Americans, by and large, are not particularly interested in the foreign policy in the face of many problems that America has itself. And maybe because my daughter, who is a social, he deals with social issues, and my son is a producer, and he likes to play poker. Well, there are many. We talk a lot about patriotism, but to the question, what is more difficult to predict than the future? It is the past. Everything changes. The evaluations of the past change very often. The interpretation change. What has been, how we were, the Americans warring in the West killed out all the Indians. Think about that. But now it is becoming important. Segregation. Think about segregation. And now? So the interpretations, assessments, evaluations change. So when we speak about the past, what past exactly do we mean? And so because of that, I think that when we read lectures for others, look at what is happening in your own country. Try to lecture yourself. And I think that it is high time to have a much better understanding of the problems at home. this is not to say that there are no foreign problems. Of course, there is the extremism, the terrorism, wars in Africa, in South America. But every day, first and foremost, when we get up in the morning, we have to look into the mirror and ask ourselves, what have we done to avoid this? Anna Skudaeva, Kostroma, alumnus of 2010. Mrs. Gati, thank you very much for your story about the American NGOs. My question is about financing. What percentage of financing is proposed by the state, and what is the percentage of private financing? I come from a Kostroma region, where there's a high number of the so-called foreign agents, and my neighbor here was fined for 300,000 rubles for what he has done for the so-called NGO, for the NGO's activities. But the financing that actually originates from the state mainly concerns those services which can expect to play a role in the upcoming elections. In other words, mobilizing the upcoming elections. Last week, the employees of the law enforcing agencies of the Russian Federation were forbidden to leave the country, including the foreign vacation. How can you react? Well, I'm not an expert in NGO financing, and all I could say, just a couple of words. A lot depends on an organization. If it's a social organization, it is often that these are not governmental or governmental financing. There's a lot coming from the church, a lot coming from the social program organizations in terms of monies. As to educational establishments, the private schools cannot get state financing or public financing. This is a very distinct, a great distinction. It is within the constitution. But transportation can be paid for. Something else, maybe nursing. So a lot is given in terms of public financing for some social programs, a lot less for politics. Why? Because if you want people to support you, and if you say that you have been given public financing, then it sounds very strange. Because with money, it is always a point of influence. It is very difficult to differentiate between where the money stops speaking and where the influence starts. So many NGOs say proudly that they do not receive any state financing. But as I said, I'm not an expert in NGO financing, and every year there has to be an audit, and it has to be shown if the monies had been spent properly. I may be able to tell you later. This is not within my competence. Your question, your second statement or question, leaving the country for the law enforcement. Let me answer with just one word: Snowden. That's understandable. To avoid another Snowden or a Russian Snowden. I think we were told that we have to initiate the renaissance of the Crimean health resorts. They will all go to Crimea. They're already in Crimea. All right, Batyr Jangyoza from Karachaevo-Circassian Republic, alumnus of 2010. Thank you so very much. My question is about the freedom of speech and the limits of the freedom of speech. There's been a case in Europe when historians and some experts could be prosecuted for denying Holocaust. Well, in the northern Caucasus, we are great victims of a totalitarian past, not unlike the Jews. But if I say today that conquer of the moon by the Americans is a mystification, or that 9/11 was perpetrated by the CIA, I may be showing my ignorance, but this is also a matter of the freedom of speech. So, what I'm saying, if I say something, what is your general view of this tragic event? Why there should be say a ban for Holocaust denial? Well, I understand why it's a crime in Germany or maybe in some other European countries, and they deny what had happened, but genocide did take place, and it is not banned to discuss this. It is banned to try and prove that Holocaust had not taken place, but in America it is not banned. Yes, you can say that you can publicly deny Holocaust. It is not to be prosecuted in America. But a person who says that will not be invited to a distant university for a lecture. But it is not by law. It is by the consensus of the establishment which will not indeed invite such a person. The problem about the Palestinians, let's take and consider that. How the Israeli troops behave in the West Bank of Jordan. Many say in America that this is a not to be debated because this may cause a security threat for Israel. And some think that it is good, that it should be spoken about. So it is a major discussion, and there are indeed people who think that it is better to be left alone, not to be touched. But I think that the more we debate a topic, the more we talk about something, the closer we come to its solution. Concealing or hiding would not solve any problem. In America, there is a problem of how to deal with people who say outrageous things. But then there's a question: who would be setting the standard of what is acceptable, of what is permissible? What is the limit? And so I think that when there's a development of the civil society, when it is developed enough, these issues can be debated. And the situation and the environment change. Up until 1967, interracial marriage was banned. Think about that. This is in America. Well, nowadays it is all different. 10% of all marriages in the United States is interracial. So what is the limitation? Things change. We always have to discuss this. We have to always to treat this as a matter of our immediate concern, so that we could understand what is permissible at every particular historical moment. Let us take an example which is closer to you. One of your authors wrote that Hitler was good. Yes, he wrote it. We all know him. No, Hitler was until 1939. Then something went wrong. But up until 1939, he was a good ruler. It's all right. He was a good ruler because he was gathering the German lands. Well, what should be done? Should such a person be prosecuted? Well, I think that according to the Russian law, he should have been prosecuted, but I haven't heard anything of the kind. According to the US law, yes, you can write such things. And so there is a question, big question that arises. Such as the question if one should bomb, one should have bombed Japan with nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs. There is a big discussion, very hot debate going on in the United States. Why Japan and not Germany? Why is it that nuclear weapons were applied against Japan? The cause was noble, to save American lives, because it would have obviated the need of a military campaign. But at a moment, everybody said yes. But nowadays, there's a debate going on. There are other opinions. There are people who say that it must not have ever happened. Who is right? So I think that when there is the civil society, when there is the freedom of speech, then it is possible to disagree. But one should not be taking laws banning talk or banning discussion or banning debates. Maybe in 20 years, things will further change and people will treat and try to consider what we are doing today. And people and our children or the grandchildren will ask us or their parents, and how was that possible? Colleagues, our time is up for this session, and let me conclude by saying that the school cherishes the friendship of such persons as Toby Gati, who has rendered her unwavering support to the school for many years, and with her help we have done and continue to be doing a lot. And the fact that Toby finds it possible to come and speak here is a great privilege. Thank you. We shall break for 30 minutes.